All right. Good evening, everybody. As always, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, if you have good video. Please let me know if you don't hear me, and I'll try and remember to look over at the chat line here and make sure I see the messages. All right. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Mystery of Babylon, particularly that the phrase Mystery Babylon is a code for Rome. Before we get going into this, I'm just going to give a few bits of info for those that are new to the program or haven't been around very long. My name is Lee Brainerd, and this program is Soothkeep. Soothkeep is Old English for Truth Fortress, and that is my vision, folks. Truth is my vision. And when you stop and think about it, we understand that we have to have a heart on fire for the things of the Lord. We ought to be zealous, and that heart religion is really what it's about. But if we don't have accurate information that our heart is on fire for, then all our zeal is worthless. I've often thought about the fact that there's lots of people that are super zealous. But you know what? Your zeal isn't worth any more than the truth it's attached to. If you're a zealous Jehovah Witness or a zealous Buddhist or a zealous Hindu or a zealous Muslim, that zeal is attached to error, and that zeal isn't worth much. If you're a very zealous believer, but you're in circles that have really bad doctrine, that diminishes the value of your zeal, diminishes the value of your worship for that matter, because worship is the same way. Worship has the value of the amount of truth that's contained in the worship, and that's the true gauge of worship. Well, anyway, just kind of a little interesting introduction here. Before we get started on Mystery Babylon, I do want to bring up one item of housekeeping. And folks, last week in my Mystery of Babylon video, I think I was a little bit harsh on one point. I compared believing that prophetic Babylon was the historic city of Babylon built on the same place to believing comic books. And folks, that's probably just a little too harsh. I should have just said that I thought it was not consistent with the historical grammatical hermeneutic. In other words, it's not consistent with literal interpretation. It's not consistent with the whole body of facts that's available. But I should have just said that and left it at that. So my apologies. You know, it's very difficult as a teacher when you have confidence in your positions and you've really done some thorough research and investigation. You got to be careful that you're not too harsh on those that haven't done the same amount of investigation, because the truth of the matter is nobody has time to investigate every issue. At any rate, that's the housekeeping. As always, in the chat room, keep it civil. It's difficult. You make it very difficult for the moderators if they have to start weighing whether you're being harsh or mean, or if you're trying to spam the chat line, advertising yourself, or if you're putting up an honest link. It makes their work a little bit harder. So just be cautious, be gentle, be nice, be friendly. If you disagree with someone, do so in a friendly way. Don't be harsh or mean about it. If you disagree with me, that's okay. Just be nice about it. If you start saying that I'm a heretic and I'm all wet and I'm on the road to hell, well, you're probably going to run into some difficulty with the moderators. But if you just plainly say something that's just frank and honest, like, brother, I disagree, there's probably not going to be a problem. All right, folks, let's get into the live stream here. Let's start with the introduction. Now, last live stream, I gave the arguments for Babylon being literal Babylon, and then I walked through each of those arguments and I showed their weaknesses, and I showed, at least to my satisfaction, that those arguments were not convincing. Now, in this live stream, we're going to look at evidence that shows or demonstrates that Mystery Babylon is code for the city of Rome, and for that matter, the city of Rome as an emblem of the empire of Rome. Originally, folks, the city and the empire were indivisible. If you mentioned the city of Rome, you were also talking about the empire of Rome. If you talked about the empire of Rome, that was inseparable from the city of Rome. But eventually, the city of Rome drifted in the direction of being more of a religious city, and it was trying to dominate the nations around it through religion. And political and economic Rome and religious Rome developed their own independent existence and their own independent identities. And as I said, the religious Rome was trying to dominate the Roman Empire. Now, eventually, these entities completely severed, and on top of that, the east and western parts of the empire divided into two. We're going to look at that a little more closely in a few minutes. But so what this brings us to is with religious Rome and political economic Rome dividing into two separate entities, we have a twofold Babylon, we have a twofold Rome. And we're going to be diving into this subject tonight, because if you don't understand the twofold Rome or the twofold Babylon, it's going to be difficult to understand the whole subject of Mystery Babylon. Now, obviously, we're going to be looking at the woman who rides a beast in Revelation chapter 17, and we're going to be looking at the beast nation, the beast empire, whose main city is a big seaport, and that's in Revelation 18. Now, the struggle between religious Babylon and political economic Babylon, or that is between religious Rome and political economic Rome, is going to come to a head in the last days. The beast gets tired of being ridden by the woman, and we read in Revelation that the beast, the 10 toes, are going to burn the whore with fire. They're going to be done with religion. They're going to be done with the whore of Babylon. They're going to be done with the woman that rides the beast. And they're going to do that in the middle of the 70th week, so they can introduce the worship of the Antichrist and the one world economic system that is based on taking the mark of the beast. Now, I'm going to do one more live stream on Babylon after this one. I'm going to try and get to it next week. I can't guarantee that I will get to it next week. And that video is going to be covering the little horn, because we're really got the little horn subject is actually its own unique subject. The little horn is not one of the 10 toes. The little horn dominates the 10. The little horn makes war against 3 of the 10 and conquers them. And then those 10 submit to the little horn. And the little horn is basically dominating the Roman Empire. But we're going to go deeper into that subject on our third Mystery Babylon video. I'm only going to touch on it tonight. We're not going to go into it tonight. Now, the first subject that we're going to go through to understand Mystery Babylon is we need to look at the word mystery, which is the Greek word mysterion. So let's read a couple verses out of the first 5 verses out of Revelation 17. Let me see if I can actually pull up a screenshot here. Share my screen. See if I can figure this out. All right, did that share? Let me know if that actually shared. Apparently it didn't. Okay, let me try again. Now, I'm trying to share eSword with you. Does it show up? Oh, second monitor, choose to use the monitor. Okay. Did not show up. All right. See why it's not showing up. Let me see if that works. Had to hit auto share. There we go. Now it should be sharing. So here we go. Revelation chapter 17. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, and whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of earth. So what we have here then is the Mystery Babylon the Great. So whoever this woman is, she is Mystery Babylon the Great. So she's not literal Babylon, she's Mystery Babylon. Now, we want to look into the meaning of this word mystery, because sometimes people claim, they attempt to debunk the theory or the belief that Babylon is Rome with the claim that mystery only pertains to truths being revealed for the first time. And so they say, okay, tell us what truth is being revealed here for the first time. Well, folks, this is not true. Mystery actually has 2 main uses in the New Testament. The first one is indeed a mystery in the sense of previously unrevealed truths. We see this with the mystery of the church. The church was a previously unknown truth. There were pieces of information in the Old Testament and in the Gospels that we can look back with 20/20 hindsight and see that they were indeed information that we can use towards an understanding of the church. But when those pieces were first given, there was absolutely no way to put 2 and 2 together and figure out that God had a new program distinct from Israel that was purchased by the blood of the Messiah in the future. There was just no way to know that. That wasn't revealed until the Apostle Paul. Now, there is a second kind of mystery that we see in the New Testament, and that is mystery in the sense of mysterious truths that would otherwise be overlooked if they weren't pointed out. And this use of mystery involves the use of figures and figurative language. So, for instance, a classic one that everybody can wrap their mind around and understand, we read in Ephesians chapter 5 about marriage. And there we read that marriage is an illustration for the tender relationship between Christ and his church. Now, this ought to be a blessing for us if we can get our mind wrapped around this, because here we see that marriage is being used in a figurative way. It's taking literal earthly marriage and using it to figure our relationship with Christ, which is only marriage in a figure. That relationship between Christ and the church isn't going to be exactly identical to an earthly marriage. But it does mirror the intimate relationship, and that's what the passage is talking about. So when we come to Babylon, we can take the same principle, and Babylon is an illustration for Rome. Now, when we use the word marriage as a picture of the relationship between Christ and his bride, we're driving home the truth that the relationship with Christ far surpasses mere servanthood. And folks, this is really a shortcoming in much of modern evangelicalism. Every time you talk about devoted believing Christianity and being a devoted disciple, the first word that comes to their mind is servant. And it's not that there isn't a servant aspect to Christianity. However, I do want to point out that you run into similar problems when you run hard on the servant path that you run into when you start treating obedience with the legalistic spirit. You find out that you run out of gas and you can't reach the heights that you're trying to reach. You can't attain the accomplishments that you're trying to accomplish. But if you enter into the spirit of the sonship of the believer, and you enter into the understanding of Christ being the bridegroom and the church being the bride, and you enter into the tenderness and the mercy and the love that's in this relationship, now you're on ground that's going to help you to have victory in a much greater way than you can ever have on any other ground. And you're going to have more fruit in your labors when you get on this ground. We make much more ground on the ground of love and grace than we will ever make on the ground of simply and purely our own obedience. We run into similar things when we look at Babylon as an illustration for Rome. It presents a truth, but it presents it in a way that is colored with information that we might otherwise miss. If we just talked about Rome, we have a picture of Rome. But if we talk about Rome and we're calling it Babylon, then our mind is going to run back to Babel. Our mind is going to run back to Old Testament idolatry. Our mind is going to run back to all the problems that Israel faced from all the paganism that flowed from Babel. And that's exactly what the Lord wants us to experience. When we talk about Rome from the angle of Babylon, we drive home the truth that Rome is the final repository of the mystery of iniquity that began in Babel. Well, there's one other thing that's going to be very helpful is a foundation to investigating the subject. And I want to point out that the book of Revelation has, prior to getting to the point where we read about Mystery Babylon, has already established a precedent for the use of ciphers to illustrate truth. Now, a cipher is a form of code where you use one word or one concept to portray another one. And sometimes it's a random cipher where you just make a list of words or a list of numbers, and they're randomly represented by they randomly represent other words or other numbers or other symbols. But you can also have spiritual ciphers where you use a word that portrays a truth or portrays a concept. And this is what the Bible does when it uses ciphers. In the Bible, ciphers, the primary use is to portray iniquitous character. So let me give you a couple examples. In chapter 2 of Revelation, in verse 20, we find out that there was a woman named Jezebel in the church of Thyatira. They had a Jezebel in their midst. And in the same chapter, in verse 14, we find out that there was the error of Balaam being taught in Pergamum. Now, the truth is, folks, I doubt that there actually was a woman by the name of Jezebel in the church of Thyatira. But everybody knew who John was talking about when he made that statement, because everyone was familiar with the Old Testament scriptures. They knew who Jezebel was, and they knew what she was guilty of. And so as soon as he pointed that out to them, they made the connection. They said, aha, okay, now we know who John's talking about. Now, but also, I doubt that Balaam's name was ever mentioned in Pergamum before John wrote to them. But when he wrote to them about Balaam's error, they quickly put two and two together, figured out the teachers he was talking about and the doctrines he was talking about. And it proved to be a blessing to them. Because basically, when he used the name Jezebel and he used the doctrine of Balaam, what he was doing, he was pointing out to them that the error that they were tolerating was far more serious and detrimental than they had ever imagined. And he was pointing out that their false teachers were operating in the spirit of people who were Old Testament apostates. But we have another cipher in Revelation chapter 11, verse 8, where we read, their bodies shall lie in the street of that great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Now, this is very, very fascinating, because this is the Lord using the ciphers of Sodom and Egypt to refer to Jerusalem. The city is not actually named in the immediate passage, although you should be able to guess by the context exactly which city is being talked about. But notice too that it says spiritually called Sodom and Egypt. We see a strong precedent here. If it's legitimate for the Lord to refer spiritually to Jerusalem as Sodom and Egypt, then it's legitimate for the Lord to refer to Rome spiritually as Babylon. Now, in the same thing, if it's legitimate for the Lord to refer to a woman teaching Jezebelian-like doctrine and to refer to her as Jezebel, and if it's legitimate to refer to teaching that resembles that of Balaam as the doctrines of Balaam, then it is perfectly legitimate for the Lord to refer to the moral character of Rome as the character of Babylon, because, folks, that's exactly what it is. And we're going to get into that subject now, because the next point that I want to take you through is the visual imagery that the Bible uses to portray the relationship between Rome at the end of the age, both Rome in the distant end of the age at the first coming of Christ, and Rome in the ultimate end of the age, which is at the second coming. That whole Rome connected to Babylon. Now, take your mind back to Daniel chapter 2. In fact, let's actually turn there, and I want to look at a couple verses there. And I pull up the passage here. All right, I'm going to pull up and I'm going to share this again for you. There we go. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze. Some versions say brass. There's slight differences between them, but they're very, very similar. Its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff. From the summer threshing floors, the wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So what we have here is this golden image. And if you caught, when you read through the whole chapter and you read through the passages that throw light on it, we see that the head of gold is Babylon. The chest and arms of silver is the Medo-Persian Empire. We see that the hips and belly of bronze or brass is Greece. And we see that the buttocks, legs, and feet of iron are the Roman Empire. And ultimately, at the very end of that Roman stretch, we have toes of iron and clay, and that's the Antichrist era at the tail end of this age, which is, folks, is not far away. We're practically there. Now, I want you to notice something about this image. You notice there's complete connection with no break from the top of the head to the toes. They just flow from one to the other. There's no break in between them. There's no parentheses between them. In fact, the image indicates an organic connection between them. And another fact that substantiate this organic connection is we see at the end of the chapter. In fact, that passage we just read, where we see the stone that was cut without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the whole image, the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold, were crushed together and became like chaff. So I want you to think about this. When this rock, which is a picture of Christ, descends from heaven and hits this image on the feet of, and especially the toes of iron and clay, it grinds the whole image to powder. This implies that Babylon or Iraq still exists, that Iran still exists, that the nations of the Greek Empire still exist, and that all the states and parts of the Roman Empire still exist. And when the Lord hits this image, it crushes all of those empire states or empire nations together. They're crushed at the same time. And so everything that's represented by this image is crushed. So this implies an organic connection, both a connection through the flow of time and a connection that they're all somehow part of the Roman Empire in the last days. Now, another point that I want to bring out here that helps you understand the big picture, and that's that the mystery of iniquity began at Babel. We read in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 about the mystery of iniquity, and we read that the mystery of iniquity is already working. But where does the mystery of iniquity come from? Well, if you want to follow the farthest thread back, the mystery of iniquity starts with Satan's rebellion against God. But on the nearer horizon, where this rebellion picked up after the flood, it first came to a head at Babel, which was the first great rebellion after the flood. And I believe that this is the rebellion that's implied in many ways in Romans chapter 1. Now, the nature of this mystery of iniquity needs to be understood. And the mystery of iniquity is Satan's program down here on earth to try and convince every man to walk away from light and embrace darkness, to convince every man to walk away from God and embrace him or anything else other than God. And it's his efforts to convince mankind to forsake every divine institution, every institution of God, and walk away. Institutions like Israel, the church, the Bible, salvation by faith alone, institutions like the home and marriage and the distinction between the sexes, and institutions like the institution of work, or like the institution of meat. Meat is a gift of God, and once he gave meat in Genesis chapter 9, he gave it on eternal basis and eternal ground. All you have to do is look at the passage, and he's never going to go back on that gift. So the devil hates dairy too, because the land that God is going to give to Israel is a land flowing with milk and honey. And that's why Satan hates using insects to gather honey, like insects like bees, and why he hates cattle for dairy. Now, the mystery of iniquity has an origin, and the origin of the mystery of iniquity, as we just mentioned, began at Babel. And it continued all the way from that time with lodging in different nations like the Assyrians and the Egyptians. And there was always one place where it was really centralized, but it always influenced the whole world. But when we come to the times of the Gentiles, there was 4 successive empires that were the primary seat of the mystery of iniquity. And so Babylon was the primary seat of the mystery of iniquity, and then Medo-Persia was the primary seat, and then Greece was the primary seat, and ultimately Rome is the primary seat. And when Rome started to evolve into 2 Romes, so that it was religious Rome and the political economic Rome, and they were starting to drift and be separate entities, this mystery of iniquity, the religious aspect of it, largely lodged in religious Rome, and the political and economic aspects of it largely lodged in the political aspects of Rome. Now, the goal of the mystery of iniquity, folks, is world domination. They want God completely rejected, and by they I mean all the fallen beings that are working with Satan and all the deep state groups and individuals here on planet Earth that are in cahoots with the devil, whether they know it or not, and every unsaved, ungodly person that loves darkness and doesn't love the light. The goal of this whole thing is to push God out of the picture, to push all of God's institutions aside, to sweep them under the carpet, or worse, to throw them away and throw them in the dumpster. And they want the image of God in man marred. And folks, that's behind some of the direction that modern medicine is going, where they're looking at the alteration of DNA and the enhancement of man. They are marring the image of God. Finally, the goal is going to be accomplished under the Antichrist. The mystery of iniquity is going to come to a head under the Antichrist. All satanic power, we read in 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 9 through 10, is going to be given to the Antichrist. And we read in Revelation 13:2 that the Antichrist is going to have Satan's throne and his power and his authority. And I want you to think about that. Satan literally has a throne on earth. It has not always been sitting in the same place, but he always has a throne here on earth. In the last days, that throne is going to be established or associated with the final form of the Roman Empire. But Satan also has power. He's not powerless. Satan has the ability to work what we would call low-grade miracles. He's on similar ground to what the priests in ancient Egypt were able to emulate the first lower levels of miracles that were worked by Moses and Aaron. They couldn't copy the harder ones, but the easier ones they did. And then they ran out of gas. And that's the same kind of ground that Satan is on. Compared to a human being, he's able to work miracles. Probably from God's perspective, they're not truly miracles. They just appear to be miracles to man. Now, he also has Satan's authority. Doesn't just have Satan's power, he's got Satan's authority. So he's going to be wielding all of Satan's authority on earth. And so he's going to be Satan's Messiah, just like the true Messiah wields God's authority on earth. All authority on heaven and earth has been given to Christ. And what a battle this is going to be, folks. This is the battle for the ages that's going on right now. And it's going to come to its peak, its head, in the tribulation, when you're going to have the representatives of God with the greatest display of miracles ever in the history of the world being displayed during the tribulation, and you're going to have the testimony of the Antichrist with the testimony of Satan being wielded with the greatest display of satanic miracles that the world has ever witnessed. And that is going to be a battle for the ages. Thankfully, folks, we who are believers in the Lord Jesus Christ right now in the church age, we're not going to be down here to see that. We're going to be sitting up in heaven watching this go on as we keep up with the news updates on big screen TV. All right, one more point that we want to look at here in connection with this visual imagery, and I'm trying to paint an image for you to see how all these things come together. So theoretically, by now, you should picture the great image that we see in Daniel chapter 2 and see the organic connection between Babylon and Rome, and see that they're all still connected and associated in the last days. And that you probably have a picture by now about the mystery of iniquity, which started in Babel and has flowed all the way through history, through the times of the Gentiles, through the Roman Empire, and down to our day. But this mystery of iniquity is picking up speed, and it's gaining critical mass, and soon it's going to explode with satanic power on this planet. But the last point I want you to look at is to understand the Roman Empire. First of all, the Antichrist empire is going to be the fourth and final empire upon the earth. It's the Roman Empire. It starts with the legs, goes down to the feet, and the final form is the toes of iron and clay. That's the fourth empire on the image. It's also the fourth beast. Of all the four beasts, it's the final one that comes up. So this fourth beast is going to be the Antichrist empire. Now, I want you to bear that in mind. The fourth beast is the Antichrist empire. The bottom part of the image that's there at the second coming, that's the Antichrist empire. Now, if we go to Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, and I'm actually going to pull those up so that we can read them together. Okay, I'm going to share it here. Okay, 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. That's a total of 69 weeks. The street shall be built again in the wall, even in troublesome times. So there's a chiasmus going on here, folks. I don't know if you ever noticed that before. He says, from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. All right. The street shall be built again in the wall, even in troublesome times. He gives what happens after the 7 weeks at the end, which is the street shall be built again in the wall, even in troublesome times. And then at the beginning, he gives until Messiah the Prince, which comes after the 62 weeks. So you've got the last thing that comes, then the first stretch of time, then the last stretch of time, then the first thing that comes. So it's a chiasmus. Anyway, verse 26. After the 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end thereof shall be with the flood. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. Then shall he confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. So what we got going on here, this makes it clear that the Roman Empire that destroyed Jerusalem, that same people, is going to be the people of the coming Antichrist. So if you put this together, the Antichrist is associated with the fourth beast. The Antichrist is associated with the bottom of the great image. The Antichrist is associated with the Roman Empire. And the Antichrist is basically the ultimate manifestation of the mystery of iniquity. You put all these things together, folks, and what do we see? Well, that math adds up to the Roman Antichrist is the fulfillment of the mystery of iniquity. This is going to be an awful time, folks, to be down here on earth. When you think of all the evil that we've seen in the history of the world that you can read about in history books, and you start crunching it together so that it happens on shorter time frames, and you start amplifying it 5, 10, 20-fold, that's what the tribulation is going to be like. Let me just give you one example, and then we're going to move on. The death toll of World War II, the largest death toll I've ever read, which includes all battlefield casualties, people that starved to death, people that died of sickness and disease, was 100 million people. Now, we read under the fourth seal that 25% of the world's population is going to pass away. If the world's population is 8 billion people, that means the fourth seal alone is going to take 1/4 of the world's population, a hefty 2 billion people. Folks, that's 20 times the death toll of World War II. And it's going to happen in a shorter period of time. So there's severe troubles coming. But at any rate, my main goal in this point was to make sure you understood that the Roman Antichrist is the fulfillment of the mystery of iniquity. He's the fulfillment of the problems that started in Babel. In other words, he's the fulfillment of all the evil, the Babylonian evil that's been in the world since the Tower of Babel. So get that connected in your mind. Babel, Babylon, and Rome. This iniquity starts in Babel, flows all the way through history, picks up steam, picks up sophistication, picks up technology till it comes to the end of the age, and it is going to be the worst big brother government ever in history. It's inescapable. Mystery Babylon is manifested in the final form in the days of the Roman Empire at the end of the age. That mystery that started with Babylon and has been flowing through all the centuries comes to a head at the end of the age in the Roman Empire. Now, let's look at a couple other foundation points. And some of this will be a little bit of review, but I need this point to be laid for a strong, strong foundation. Rome and Mystery Babylon, they're intimately connected. The fourth beast, the Roman Empire, and Mystery Babylon are identical. The final form of the mystery of Babylonian iniquity, which started in Babel, is going to be embodied in Rome. And it will be organically and historically connected to all the preceding Gentile powers of the great image, and actually organically and historically linked all the way back to Babel. Folks, which we have to understand here is behind all this history. This is not mere human history. You need to understand that. This is a satanic conspiracy that came to a head at Babel, an effort to bring about a one world rebellion against the living God. And God judged it. And he separated the people with languages. He separated them into different cultures and peoples and nations. And he sent them to distant parts of the globe so that you had the Norse people and the Scandinavian peoples way up north. And you had Scythian peoples north in northern Russia. And the Oriental peoples went far east. And other peoples went to North America and South America. They went all over the globe, folks. And deep into Africa. He spread them all over the place. That was a judgment so that man couldn't come to a one world government prior to the appointed time at the end of the 6,000 years that God had established. So then every time the empire started to come together, the Lord would engineer it so that another empire would conquer it, crush it, and break its strength. And this just kept happening successively. But what's behind all these empires, folks, is those dark spirits that were working in Babel, trying to bring about one world government. And they tried with the Assyrian Empire. They tried with Egypt. And when we come to the times of the Gentiles, when God took the kingdom away from Israel, they were trying with Babylon. They were trying with Medo-Persia. They were trying with the Greek Empire. They were trying with the Roman Empire. And they've been trying all along. And sometimes they've even been trying through other nations like Nazi Germany or China or Russia, trying to bring about a new world order. Sometimes these spirits are at odds with each other, but they've all got the same goal. They've all got the goal of a new world order down here that's in rebellion against the living God. And right now they are implementing their program. We're getting to the tail end of the church age. We're getting to the tail end of the time of the Babylonian mystery of iniquity. And things are coming to a head, folks. We're heading rapidly towards a one world language, which is English. We're heading rapidly towards a one world economic system. We're heading rapidly towards one world government. We're already seeing one world government implemented to a small degree in small areas, particularly in things like medicine and travel. But this is ultimately going to come to a head. The final form of the Roman Empire is going to be organically and historically connected to every earlier version of the Roman Empire, and it's going to be connected to the whole mystery of Babylon system. And we're going to have that ugly on earth finally down here, that those powers have been angling at the whole time and have been restrained only because God has been restraining them. Now, ultimately, when we get to the end of this age and we see the final iteration of the Roman Empire, folks, it actually has to be Roman. It can't just have the Roman label. That's not going to happen. It's going to manifest Roman principles and Roman morality. And that's exactly what we're seeing happen in Europe and America and Canada, Australia, in England, every place that was either part of the original Roman Empire or colonies of the fractured pieces of the Roman Empire, all those places are embracing to some degree or other Roman morality and a Roman government and Roman principles. Now, the final iteration of this Roman Empire, folks, is going to bear a similar footprint to the historical Roman Empire. It's going to have a footprint that's going to cover Europe and the Middle East and Africa. It probably doesn't have to be exactly the same. Could be a little different, could be a little smaller, could be a little bigger, but it has to have essentially the same general footprint because this is the Roman Empire. And it's the Roman Empire split into pieces. Now, there's nothing in the Bible, whether plainly stated or whether a precedence or whether just common sense, which forbids the final version of the Roman Empire from being an expanded or extended or somewhat modified version. That, in fact, is my mind. I suspect that those basically the nations that rose from the empire building mentality of Spain and France and England, for example, that many of those nations actually did embrace the Roman spirit, the Roman culture, and they are, in a sense, extensions of Europe. Now, exactly what part they're going to play in the Roman Empire, that's another question altogether, but I do think it's legitimate to regard them as extensions of that ancient fractured Roman Empire. And the last point I'm going to make on this point, folks, is that the little horn, and we're going to look at this in another time. We're not going to look at it tonight. I'm just going to bring it up. But the little horn is not one of the 10 toes. The little horn rises after the 10 toes are already in place. So just bear that in mind, because the Antichrist is the little horn, and he also comes out of the nation that is the little horn. So he's the 11th nation in a sense, and he dominates the 10. Now, I mentioned earlier that we need to understand the dual nature of the Rome/Mystery Babylon in the last days. If we don't understand the dual nature, we're going to struggle to understand it. Now, this concept of a dual Rome or a dual Mystery Babylon in the last days throws a lot of people. And so it's too much to try and think of two distinct Babylons. And so they want to combine them, and they see just one Babylon in the last days. But you're going to run into difficulties where these two Babylons are actually going to be hard to make into one. Let me start by giving you the historical precedents for a divided empire, so that you understand that this isn't just wild imagination when people talk about the Roman Empire having two distinct entities or two distinct manifestations in the last days. I want to point out that the Greek Empire started as a single empire. But if you recall what we read in the book of Daniel, and maybe some of you have actually read in history and seen it much more elaborated on, you'll understand that it was still the Greek Empire, folks, after it split into four pieces. If I can recall the guys' names, it was Cassander, Lysimachus, I don't remember all four of their names, but anyways, the Ptolemy and, it doesn't matter. But there was four of those Greek empires, and they split into the four generals and four empires, four sub-empires, and they fought amongst each other. They beat each other up, and the fortunes of their empires would wax and wane. But it was still the Greek Empire, even though it was divided into four pieces and they were fighting with each other. Now, the Roman Empire was still the Roman Empire after it split into two pieces. It split in the western half and the eastern half. And the final division, if I recall the date, was about 395 AD. But the Roman Empire was still the Roman Empire when it divided into two pieces. And it was still the Roman Empire when the Western Empire collapsed. And the de facto capital of the Roman Empire was Constantinople. It was still the Roman Empire, folks, when the eastern portion fell to the Ottoman Empire. I believe that was about 1453. And the divided West grew strong again. It was still the Roman Empire when the Muslims conquered Jerusalem on a number of occasions during the time of the Crusades. And it was still the Roman Empire after each half divided into feet and then spread out into toes. All this fractioning and dividing up doesn't make it cease to be the Roman Empire. I don't know if you've thought about this before, folks, but Jerusalem has always been under the domination of the Roman Empire. They've never ceased to be under the domination of the Roman Empire. Even in the Crusades, they bounced back and forth between being dominated by the western half of the Roman Empire and being dominated by the eastern half of the Roman Empire, albeit the eastern half taken over to a large degree by Islam. So, but it was still the eastern half of the Roman Empire. And it was dominated by, Jerusalem was dominated for a short while by France, then by England. Prior to that, it was dominated by Turkey. And now it's largely under the behest of the United States. Now, once you understand this divided principle that it was still the Greek Empire when the Greek Empire is divided, it's still the Roman Empire when the Roman Empire is divided, you shouldn't have a problem seeing two different aspects of the Roman Empire alive at the same time, the religious Rome and the economic political Rome, where the woman, which is a religious Rome, is trying to dominate political and economic Rome. Now, let's take a quick run through a quick history for an overview of Rome. The whole idea of dividing the Roman Empire was first broached about 286 under Diocletian, and this desire was really an attempt to stabilize the empire. The empire was so big and so spread out that it was hard to control the entire empire without modern communications, by the way, from Rome. And so they decided to split it into two pieces, and they would be co-equals, really. And they started to implement this. It didn't really fully get rolled out, but they made steps in that direction. It was around 395 AD that there was a permanent separation between the eastern half and the western half, and the eastern half was known as the Byzantine Empire, and the capital was originally Byzantium. But in this transition time between full separation, around 330 AD, Constantine changed the name of Byzantium, which is the capital city, to Constantinople. Now, later on, the West fell. Under the attacks of the Vandals and the Goths and other nations, the northern hordes, they sacked the Roman Empire 4 or 5 times, and eventually the Roman Empire collapsed. They no longer had a central government, and the individual nations on the western half became, for all practical purposes, independent. But you still had the eastern half. And as I mentioned earlier, when that western half fell, the de facto capital for the whole empire ended up being Constantinople. Now, sometime around the time of the Western Empire collapsing and losing central government that really was able to dominate Europe, about this time, Rome, the city of Rome, had been already starting to morph from a city that was primarily political and economic to a city that was becoming a religious powerhouse. And over time, that city morphed from where it was no longer merely and only political dominance over the nations around, or at least attempting to have political dominance. It became a city with religious dominance. And once it became a city with religious dominance, now it was able to again exercise political dominance, but it had an edge on it that it didn't used to have. Now, eventually, the church consolidated power in Rome, and they began to dominate all the European nations again, and they began to intervene in the Middle East, and that's where the Crusades come into the picture. Now, when you make this historical observation of what happened to Rome, that Rome morphed from a city that was primarily political to a city that was primarily religious but still tried to maintain political dominance. This is just a simple fact of history. And when you bear this fact of history in mind, folks, this is why prophecy teachers regularly regard Rome in Revelation 17 to be religious Rome. There's nothing in the context itself in Revelation 17 that tells you that this is religious Rome. And that leaves some introductory level students scratching their heads, wondering why all these big gun Bible teachers like Dave Hunt and folks of his caliber teach that Rome in Revelation 17 or Babylon in Revelation 17 is religious Rome. Well, folks, they see the prophecy that's made in Revelation 17. They see that we're near the end of the age, and they see where history has taken us, and they realize that this precedent that's been set by history is not likely to change in just a decade or two. And so it's easy to see then that what history has given us right now when we're in the prophetic age, that's what we have to work with. And what do we have to work with in Rome? Rome is a religious powerhouse with over 1 billion people at its behest. It's still an insanely powerful institution, folks, when it comes to politics in North and South America and in Europe and in parts of Asia and in parts of Africa. It's still an insanely powerful institution in the UN. It's still an insanely powerful institution in promoting one world ecumenical religion. So this city has a lot of power, but its power is based on religion that tries to dominate politics. And because their main goal is to dominate politics, they feel perfectly at ease to change what they believe, to modify what they believe. And folks, right now, there's a lot of people that if you'd asked them 10, 15 years ago if the Catholic Church would ever go belly up on conservative theology, and if they would ever go belly up on moral issues, they would have laughed at you. They'd have laughed you to scorn. And now, folks, there are Catholics all around the world who are pulling their hair out of their head. What are they going to do? The Catholic Church that they trusted was never going to apostatize from the faith because she's the true church, has now proved to be an apostate church beyond the kind of apostasy that evangelicals already accused her of. Now she's apostatizing from the doctrines of orthodoxy, and now she's apostatizing on issues of morality, like abortion and sexuality. Folks, this is a huge issue. And while we're on this subject, folks, we need to be exercised in prayer. I believe God wants to do a mighty work in calling people out of Babylon, out of the Catholic Church. Come out of her, my people, lest you be a partaker of her sin. Her judgment's coming, folks. And while we're at it, folks, take time. If you have friends in the Catholic Church who appear to have any interest at all in the things of God, take time, put some time into them. Share the gospel with them. Share prophecy with them. Strike while the iron is hot. Folks, I'm not sure that there's ever been a time in history when there's a potential for a greater harvest out of the Catholic Church than now, unless it been right at the time of the Reformation. Because as this darkness descends on the Roman Catholic Church, and their darkness is going to get much, much darker. Those people that were clinging to the little bit of light that they had in the Catholic Church, they're going to be looking around and wondering what in the world they should be doing. And folks, we need to be helping them by telling them, come out of her, my people, lest you be a partaker of her sins. Anyway, may God lay that on some of your hearts as an exercise. It's been on my heart. I think God wants to have a harvest there. But anyway, back to our little outline here. We know that Revelation 17 is religious Rome because we trust what we see in the last 1,800 years of church history. And we don't think it's going to change in the next few decades. It is what it is. Rome is a religious powerhouse trying to exercise political force in the world. By the way, before we move on to the eastern half of the Roman Empire, John's surprise was not over the name of the city. His surprise wasn't over the geographical location of the city. And it doesn't matter whether this was literally Rome or literally Babylon. He's not surprised over that. And he's not surprised over the geographical location. He's not surprised that this city is in Rome, Italy, or that this city is in Babylon in Iraq. He's not surprised over that. His surprise is over what happened to the church. You know, early in church history, the church in Rome became a powerhouse. This isn't just Catholic fiction, folks. This is actually the facts of history. Now, I think the Catholic Church has embellished the history a little bit and used that history for their own ends. But the fact is, by the time we get to the end of the 1st century AD, Rome was already probably the most powerful city in Christendom. But at any rate, his surprise was what happened to the church, who was already growing strong in Rome. What was supposed to be a small mustard plant, because it was started with a tiny seed, had experienced unnatural growth and was now a colossal tree that gave roost to every kind of dirty birds of the air, the demons, and it dominated the nations. So that was what John's surprise was about. He was looking and he said, wait a minute, that can't be the church that I'm part of the foundation of. And the Lord's attitude is, you're right, it's not. The church apostatized very early on, and it took on the principles of the world, and it wanted world influence, and it wanted to be welcomed by the world. And it grew to an unnatural size and had unnatural power and unnatural strength. And that's the institution that we're dealing with today. Now, eventually, as we're looking at the history of this fractured Roman Empire, the eastern half fell. It fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1453, and the focus of the empire now drifted back west. And so by the time we come to the Reformation and the Renaissance, Europe was again the central player in the history of that entire region of the world that stretches from Europe in the Mediterranean and North Africa and the Middle East and near Asia, that whole big chunk of the world. That's the Bible scene there, right? Western Europe has again become the dominant player. Now, they tried to have unity efforts in Europe. There was various efforts that were attempted and they failed. Napoleon tried to unify Europe and he failed. The Holy Roman Empire movement tried to unify on several occasions and they failed. Right now, the EU is making an effort that's actually the most successful effort to date to unify Europe. But the integration has fallen short. It hasn't gone as far or as fast as the New World Order movers and shakers would like. And in some respects, the EU resembles more a cooperation than an empire. But, folks, the last point of the history of the fractured Roman Empire is the last days. And in the last days, that Roman Empire is going to see unity. The little horn is going to be the unifying factor. He's going to conquer 3 of those nations, and he's going to have all 10 at his behest. And now the little horn is both a nation and the leader of that nation, just like Nebuchadnezzar, or just like the golden head was both Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. So the little horn is both a leader and the nation he leads. But anyway, this little horn is going to energize and revitalize the efforts to restore the Roman Empire. And it's not going to be limited, folks, just to Europe. Right now, the EU is limited to Europe. That's not the restored Roman Empire. There's many pieces of the restored Roman Empire there. But when this restored Roman Empire comes together, it's going to include Europe. It's going to include the Middle East, particularly the oil-bearing regions. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually consumes Iran too. And it's going to include North Africa, because North Africa was part of the Roman Empire. Now, again, as I said earlier, it doesn't have to be the exact same territory, but it has to bear a close resemblance. And anything that's going to be associated with it has to have an organic connection to it. So if the Roman Empire expands in any way, it has to be a legitimate organic connection. They have to be, for instance, colonies from the fractured pieces of the western half. There are no colonies from the eastern half that ever lasted or amounted to anything. Colonies from the western half amounted to a great deal. Now, I want to point out that there's a bunch of contrasts between the woman in Revelation 17 and the beast in Revelation 18. If we see these contrasts, it will help us to understand the 2 unique entities that are divergences from the original Roman Empire. And there's 2 different pieces of the Roman Empire in the last days that are going to end up having tension with each other, and only one's going to come out on top. In Revelation 17, we see the whore of Babylon riding the beast. Folks, the beast is Babylon. So the whore of Babylon is riding Babylon. In Revelation 18, we see Babylon as the beast. In Revelation 17, the whore sits on 7 hills. In Revelation 18, Babylon is a mighty seaport city. And to me, this is a big contrast. Sitting on 7 hills that are fairly well removed from the ocean is not the same thing as being a seaport city. All right. Now, in verse 7, or in chapter 17, the whore is drunk with the blood of the saints. We see that in Revelation chapter 17, verse 6. But in chapter 18, Babylon is held guilty of all the blood of all the saints of all the ages. That's Revelation 18:24. So when I start putting these pieces together, one thing that I see, that the dominant part, the part that's the lion's share of the spirit of Babel, is the political and economic Babel. The religious part is the inferior part. And that's the part that's going to be set aside. Now, that religious part is responsible for many, many deaths in the history of the world. But they are by no means responsible for all of the deaths of the godly in the world. But because the larger Babylon, the political economic Babylon, is being held accountable even for that little piece of Babylon that spawned off from her, she's held accountable as the representative of all the Babylonian influence since Babel. She's held accountable for all that, and she is held accountable for all the blood of all the saints of all the ages. Now, one more thing I want to point out that's a difference between what we see in 17 and what we see in 18. I want to point out that the whore in chapter 17 is judged by the 10 kings in the middle of the week and burned with fire. And this is to prepare the world, to get religion out of the way, to get everything that's called God or reverenced out of the way, so the whole world can worship the antichrist and Satan himself. In chapter 18, the beast is judged by God himself at the second coming. So the very difference here. Chapter 17, the woman that rides the beast is judged in the middle of the 70th week so that they can institute the worship of the Antichrist. The beast in Revelation 18, the beast nation or the beast empire, the final form of the Antichrist government, is judged by God himself at the second coming. So I think by now you should be able to see that the fourth beast is morally related to, but politically distinct from, the woman who rides the beast. Now, a really big point that we need to point out here, folks, is that Babylon is guilty of the blood of all the martyrs. This needs to be a gigantic foundation stone for your understanding of Babylon, all right? That's found in Revelation 18:24, that Babylon is held accountable for all the blood of all the saints. Now, this universal blood guilt and the judgment for this blood guilt implies that this has to happen after the Great Tribulation. I want you to think about this. There is, in my mind, there is zero chance that the perpetrators of the Great Tribulation, which is the worst tribulation in all the history of the world, are going to be excluded from the judgment of Babylon for the blood of all the martyrs. The fact of the matter is, the tribulation is the greatest time of martyrdom in the history of the world. And the tribulation is carried forth in this mystery of iniquity that came from Babel. This has been the goal that Babel has had the whole time. How could the Great Tribulation be excluded? There's no way it can be. The Great Tribulation is part of this whole Babylon picture. It's the crown jewel of the mystery of iniquity. And therefore, the judgment of Babylon has to be at the second coming. It can't be in the middle of the week. It can't be before the 70th week. And it can't be around the time of the rapture. So, to sum it up, if Babylon is going to be judged for all the blood of all the saints that was ever shed in the world, she can't be judged until the second coming. Because, folks, there are no saints going to be persecuted or martyred in the millennium. It's just not going to happen. Even during that great rebellion, they're not going to be allowed to kill or hurt anybody unless they kill or hurt themselves. They're not going to be allowed to kill a single saint. They're not going to conquer a single institution. They're just going to gather for a gigantic hate fest, a gigantic protest, and it's going to end with fire. But if Babylon is going to be judged for all the saints who were ever martyred in the entire history of the world, that has to happen at the second coming. It can't happen a week or a month or a year, 3.5 years, 7 years earlier. It just can't. At any rate, now to try and understand Babylon 2, we need to understand that this isn't merely judging the human perpetrators that have been involved in Babylon from Babel all the way to the last days, including the Antichrist government. What you have to understand is that the real power behind the mystery of Babylon since Babel is the fallen angels. It's the fallen realm. And so God cannot truly and fully judge Babylon unless and until he judges the fallen angels that perpetrated this thing. Again, this limits the judgment, the full judgment, the final judgment of all Babylon. This whole mystery Babylon, it's limited to the second coming. Because that's when God judges the fallen realm. We read in Isaiah 24, verses 21 through 23, about the binding of Satan. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall punish the host of the high ones, that are on high, and the kings of the earth upon the earth. And they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and they shall be shut up in the prison, and after many days they shall be visited. This is implying that they're going to be released at the end of the millennium. Then the moon shall be confounded, and the sun ashamed, when the Lord of hosts shall reign in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and before his ancients gloriously. So notice that this imprisonment of the fallen beings is associated with the second coming and the signs in the heavens that are associated with the second coming. Now, one last big section that we have to go through here, and this is the section where I point out that Babylon is a code word for Rome. Now, I want to point something out. In 1 Peter 5:13, we read, "She who is in Babylon, elect together with you, greets you, and so does Mark, my son." Now, there's really only been two common understandings of this verse. There's probably been 100 minor ones, but two major ones in the commentaries. And that's that one is literal Babylon and one is spiritual Babylon, which is almost always, when people go that way, is understood as the city of Rome. Now, who is this she who is elect with you? Well, some have claimed it might be Peter's wife, but that runs into some problems. The most common theory, and it's the one I think is right, is that this is simply a reference to the church in Rome. Now, I don't think that Babylon here can be the literal city of Babylon. Folks, Babylon at the time that Peter wrote 1 Peter, which is somewhere around 62 to 64 AD, when he was in Rome, Babylon at that time was a desert. It was buried under dunes. And this is common knowledge among the educated in his day, and it's common knowledge amongst all who have done research in the history of Babylon in the Middle East in that time. You will see, if you look at ancient history, you're going to see that Babylon was completely desolate at the time of Emperor Trajan's visit in AD 115. So that would be 50 years after Peter wrote. And it had been desolate for a long time already. And this account of Trajan's visit in 115 AD is found in Philo, it's found in Josephus, it's found in Pliny, it's found in Dio Cassius in his History of Rome, and it's found in Strabo in his Geography. And folks, on top of that, not only was Babylon a desert place where nobody lived, there was no city there. I mean, there was a Babylon for a country, but the city of Babylon, there was no city. It was gone. It was a few pieces of stone sticking out of the sand here and there. It was covered by sand. On top of that, there is no historical record that Peter ever went to the nation of Babylon, much less the city of Babylon. Now, on the other hand, it's not too difficult to imagine Babylon as the city of Rome. At the time that 1 Peter was written, Rome was already a beachhead city. It was already a stronghold for the church. In fact, we see in church history and in ancient history that there was already a strong church by AD 49, because Emperor Claudius expelled the Jews for rioting over Christus. Now, Christus here is probably an early Latinization for Christos. Now, and this account is actually, this riot is mentioned by Luke in Acts 18, verses 2 through 4. Now, later on, after this, when the Jews were expelled, and the Jews that were expelled were both unconverted Jews and Messianic Jews. But out of the Messianic Jews that were expelled included Priscilla and Aquila. And Paul met them after they'd been expelled from Rome, and they worked together on occasion. Now, what's interesting is that Paul wrote his letter to Rome, he wrote that around AD 57 to AD 59, prior to Peter's time in Rome. And he wrote to an already well-established Roman church. Now, we also have some significant testimony in the early church that Peter actually did labor in Rome. In 1 Clement chapter 5, we read that Peter took the gospel to the furthest west point at the time, and then he suffered under the prefects. We're assuming this is probably the Roman prefects in the government in Nero's reign. It's just a guesstimation based on this statement here that furthest west would be Rome. It could be somewhere further west, but we do know that Peter did get to Rome, and that when the saints first went to Rome, that was the western frontier. Now, in Irenaeus, in his heresies, in book 3, we read, Matthew also issued a written gospel amongst the Hebrews in their own dialect. Matthew, as far as we know, is the only gospel that had an original Aramaic New Testament. The rest were originally written in Greek. Now, and he did this while Peter and Paul were preaching at Rome and laying the foundations of the church. Now, I want to point out here, sometimes people get frustrated when they read about here Peter and Paul laying the foundations of the church, because that sounds a little bit too Roman Catholic-y. Folks, the fact of the matter is, God has always used men of weight to engage in some heavy lifting in various works. Peter and Paul were not the only people there. They were not the only respected laborers there. There were a lot of other respected laborers there. They were just the heavyweights amongst the heavyweights. And there were the first Christians that went to Rome were probably people that were at the first Passover when the Holy Spirit fell, and they went and took the gospel back to Rome. And so there was probably already churches being established before the apostles got there. So don't worry too much about the understanding the early church fathers had that Peter and Paul were preaching at Rome and laying the foundation of the church. We don't want to make too much out of that. We want it to let it be a statement of historical fact, but we don't want to read a Roman Catholicism into it. After their departure, Mark the disciple and interpreter of Peter did also hand down to us in writing what had been preached by Peter. Plain statement by Irenaeus, who was a friend of Polycarp, and Polycarp was a disciple of John. So here we have Clement, who is actually a disciple of Peter himself, who personally knew Peter. And then we have Irenaeus, who is just one generation further removed. And both of them tell us that Peter labored significantly in Rome. Now, these men were so close to the actual happenings and so close to the actual movers and shakers that there's no reason to suspect that these accounts are either fabrications or just simple historical mistakes. And I have some other historians here from a later time that mention Peter too, but they probably depend on the earlier historians. So that is not as significant a weight. But you can find it also in Tertullian, Eusebius in his ecclesiastical history. You can find it in Lactantius in his book on the deaths of the persecuted. So it's in history, folks. On top of that, we have the traditional view, which informs us that 1 Peter was written from Rome prior to Peter's martyrdom, which happened around 65 AD. And there is no competing tradition to this. There is no other tradition that he wrote in a different city. So I think when we look at the fact that Peter was in Rome, and we look at the fact that the ancient tradition says that Peter wrote 1 Peter from Rome, this implies, these two facts, folks, imply that when Peter wrote his line in the book of 1 Peter, that she who is in Babylon elect together with you greet you, he was referring, using to Rome using Babylon as a cipher for Rome. And I do have one quote from Eusebius Pamphilius, and he wrote about AD 303. And he pointed out that it is said that Peter's first epistle, in which he makes mention of Mark, was composed at Rome itself. And this quote goes on to say, and that he himself indicates this, referring to the city figuratively as Babylon. Now, this raises a question. If Peter did refer to Rome here with the word Babylon, why did he do it? What purpose was there in this? Well, what we have to understand, folks, if 1 Peter was actually written from Rome around 62 to 64 AD, it was written during the reign of Nero. Nero was the first severe persecutor of the church, and there was an extremely strong persecution of the believers going on in Rome under Nero. So it's not hard to understand why Peter didn't want to reveal that one of the apostles was actually living and working in Rome. He didn't want the government to figure this out and come after him. He's just using a little security measures, folks. This isn't a whole lot different than you and I using secure phones or secure email. Or it's not a whole lot different, folks, than us using code words when we talk about certain issues on YouTube videos. It's the same kind of stuff. So in conclusion, folks, I think I've presented some pretty good reasons here why it's legit to regard Babylon in Revelation 17 and Revelation 18 as a code for Rome. I believe I have presented some good reasons that why it's legitimate to see a distinction between religious Babylon in Revelation 17 and political economic Babylon in Revelation 18. And while I can't say that this has been the position of virtually everybody in dispensationalism for the last 150 years, I can say it's been the position of a large number of great dispensational teachers in the last 150 years, especially in the decades past, like from World War II back into the 1800s. It was a really common understanding. Now, one of the things that's going to help you understand the difficulties in the interpretation of these two chapters is if you understand that those who identify with the Reformers and the Protestants tended to deny that Babylon in Peter and in Revelation was a reference to Rome. But they had political reasons for doing so, folks, because it seemed to owning that Rome was referred to as Babylon in Revelation and in Peter seemed to help confirm the Catholic contention that Peter was the first pope. And they didn't want to have to deal with that. Well, folks, we don't have to worry about it. The fact that Peter was in Rome in the early 60s AD up until his martyrdom in AD 65, and the fact that he probably wrote First Peter from Rome somewhere between AD 62 and AD 64. We could grant this all day long, and it doesn't give any ground at all to believe that Peter was the first pope. There's no necessary connection. So I just don't get hyped up over that. I could care less what the Roman Catholic Church says or does with Peter. I'm not going to get my doctrine from reacting from the Roman Catholic Church. I want to get my doctrine simply from the facts of the scriptures and the facts of history. Those two things are going to combine to give. In the Bible, if there's ever a question, we always side with the Bible over what history says, always. But there's times when the Bible has light cast on it from history, and we can use history that way if we use it wisely and we don't allow history to take us down a path that's contrary to Scripture. Now, folks, if all you can see here is that you can see the connection that Babylon is a cipher for Rome, and that's all the farther you get. And you get confused when you think about religious Babylon and political economic Babylon. Don't worry about it. That's okay. If you simply understand that the mystery of Babylon is going to be embodied in the last days in the Roman Empire, then you're golden. You've got the bulk of the matter right there, and the rest is just details. And if you don't really understand what the footprint of the Roman Empire is going to be, and whether or not Roman colonies from the fractured empires are part of the empire or not, don't worry about it. Those are secondary questions. As long as you understand that it's the Roman Empire that's going to be the antichrist empire in the last days. If you understand that the Roman Empire, in one form or another, in a revitalized form, is going to be the fourth beast. It's going to be the feet of iron and clay. It's going to be Mystery Babylon in its final form. If you understand that, then you're golden, even if you don't understand the details. And if your own speculations on who the little horn are wrong, or you don't have any speculations on who the little horn is, or you don't actually care who the little horn is, that's okay too. If we understand that Mystery Babylon is focused on Rome, then and the Roman Empire in the last days, folks, if we get that much right, we are on the right side of the fence, and everything else is just details. So with that, this is the end of my presentation tonight, folks. Hopefully I've been an encouragement to you, presented a lot of information. Some of you probably feel like you get a lot of information. It comes out like a fire hose. I'm going to tell you what I'm working on right now for a project. My website administrators, because I've hired that job out, I just could not keep up with it on my own. I found a godly young man who has his own company, who has been doing websites for a business for a few years. He's helping me out. And ultimately, what we're going to have under the live streams and under the videos is we're going to have a link for the transcripts of everything I said in the videos or in the live streams. And we're also going to have links under the videos and the live streams of the notes that I used for that. So it might take me a little time to get these notes up, folks. But once we get that up and running, then we're going to make sure that that happens with every video. Those notes are going to be linked. So, and I may try and get a few of these first ones up myself here, the Mystery Babylon ones. So you just pray that I'll squeeze that into my to-do list. At any rate, I think if we have the notes up, that's going to help a lot of people to go back and look stuff up. So, folks, that's the end of the presentation. I'll be closing it up here. Keep looking up. Keep plodding along in the work of God. And from here, we're going to move into the questions. So I'm going to pull up Facebook Messenger and pull up the questions. Okie doke. Oh, hey. These are much easier. I think someone must have typed them. Oh, is this from today? Was my camera at a bad angle? Someone says, Lee, can you adjust your camera to see better? And I'm sorry about that. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. All right. The first question is thoughts on Ezekiel 4, 1 through 6. Does it say anything on the rapture? Typically, folks, right off the top of my head, I would say that the Old Testament passages rarely say anything directly about the rapture, but principles of deliverance always have some application to the rapture. Now, in Ezekiel chapter 4, verses 1 through 6, we have Ezekiel lying on his side for 390 days for the iniquity of the house of Israel, and then lying on another 40 days for the iniquity of the house of Judah. Folks, if there's anything in this passage that has anything to do with the timing of the rapture, it's way over my head. I've never seen anything in this passage I would think had anything to do with the timing of the rapture. I couldn't say for absolute certain there's nothing there, but I've never read anyone that saw anything there, and I haven't seen anything there. Okay, if the church is the bride of Christ, can you explain Revelation 21:2? Yes, that's actually not too complex of a question. Revelation 21:2. We see, I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Now, folks, let me point out something that we see about the New Jerusalem. We read in 21:14, the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Okay, but if we back up a little bit, in verse 12, we read, she had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and 12 angels at the gates, and names written upon them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. So I believe it's in Galatians we read that the New Jerusalem, which is above, is the mother of us all. And here we see an exemplification of this. That city is the home for all of the redeemed and not merely the church. So on the gates of the city, we have the names of the 12 patriarchs for the 12 tribes of Israel. And on the foundations, we have the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So in this city, we have all the church and we have all of Israel. In fact, we're going to have all the saints of all the ages. But now, why is the city adorned as a bride? Well, here's the reason, folks. This is not an exhaustive reason because there's obviously going to be some information that we don't have at our fingertips. But the church is the bride of the Son, and Israel is the bride of the Father. Hopefully that'll help you out. Oh yeah, the software program I was using that I displayed there was eSword. I just have it set up my own way. But I typically use Logos. But if I'm just using the English versions, eSword is really easy, real fast to have 3, 4, 5 English versions side by side. And I do some of my Greek study in eSword too. If I'm going to go into intensive language study, like if I'm going to be working with the Syriac or the Hebrew, then I'm going to be using Logos. Do you believe we will experience the collapse of America before the rapture? Well, let me say 2 things. No, I do not believe that we are going to see a collapse of America before the rapture. But the second thing I need to say is, folks, that's just my opinion. I'm not the only Bible teacher out there that has wisdom, and I could be wrong on this. But my thought is, I believe America is going to be part of the Roman Empire. I'm not going to tell you which part I think it's going to be until we actually get to that subject in the future. But I do believe America will be part of the Roman Empire, a vital part of it. And therefore, I don't believe America is going to collapse before the rapture. If America does collapse before the rapture, of course, then that's going to tell everybody that I was all wet on this subject. But I won't be the only preacher that will have egg on his face in the rapture, because we've all made a few mistakes somewhere. Could Mystery Babylon be many cities connected together as one power? Well, Mystery Babylon is a nation, is absolutely going to be many cities connected together as a power, because Mystery Babylon in the whole picture is going to be the 10 toes plus the little horn. Even just the little horn alone is going to be a number of powerful cities connected together as one. But ultimately, though, we see one city in Revelation 18 that's being held accountable for the mystery of iniquity and for all the blood of all the saints. Now, some have proposed, I believe it was Gary Stearman, for instance, that proposes that really everything from New York City to Washington, D.C., that whole region is just kind of treated as one big city. And in many ways, New York City is the harbor for that huge mega city. And he may well be right on that. Question, are you related to David Brainerd? Yes, I am. I'm not a direct blood descendant relative of him because obviously he passed away without having children. But in 1640, a man by the name of Daniel Brainerd set foot on the shores of America as an orphan. He had no known relatives in the old world, and every Brainerd in the world, no matter how you spell the last name, is descended from Daniel Brainerd and his 7 sons. And so I've been given 2 books with the whole Brainerd family tree. And to be honest, I don't think I put 10 minutes into those books. It's not that I don't care, but I just haven't had enough care about that to look in to see which branch of the family I'm descended from. Who is the woman clothed in the sun with the moon under her feet and the 12 stars around her head? I believe that woman is a picture of Israel. Question, will the Antichrist come from Rome? The city of Rome, perhaps. The empire of Rome, absolutely. Absolutely. He has to be a member of the Roman Empire. Now, historically, especially some of the later Roman emperors were not blood Romans. They were merely Roman citizens. Armageddon and Ezekiel 38 is fought on horses. What are your thoughts on this? Okay, this is a very interesting question, and I'm not going to go super deep into this. But what you have to understand is we get confused sometimes when we take words like horses, and we think if it says horse, then to be literal, it has to be a horse. And we don't understand that many times words, especially military terms, have developed over the years, so we're using the same word with a vastly expanded senses. And those further senses are just as literal as the original senses. Let me give you an example. We have the word car. When you hear the word car, what do you think of? The first thing that comes to mind is an internal combustion vehicle that runs on gas or diesel and has 4 air-filled rubber tires, pneumatic tires, okay? However, there was a time when some of the cars had steel tires and some of the cars were steam combustion or coal combustion, right? But prior to that, car and carriage. See, car is just a short form of the word carriage. Carriage was a horse-drawn vehicle. A chariot is the same word. It's the same stem historically. It was drawn by horses. And so you can see how this word has been used and expanded. And so when we come to terms like arms, we talk about small arms. Well, we're talking about automatic rifles, semi-automatic rifles, pistols, other small handheld combat weapons like the grenade launchers. These are small arms. Well, how did he get the name arm? I mean, arm literally just means the arm, right? Well, small arms first referred to knives and swords and other weapons, maces, spears, lances. And when we came into weapons, then on modern weapons, then arms was transferred to that. But if you go back the other direction, arms was originally things made out of, well, bronze, not even steel or iron. And prior to that, wood and stone. So, we have an extension here through time of these words developed. And so, for instance, let me give you the use of missile. When the word missile was first used, it referred, whether the Greek word for missile, which is bolle, or the Latin word for missile, which is where we get the English word for missile, they were used of things that were thrown from a slingshot, could be a small stone, or things thrown from a catapult, which could be a big stone. But the missiles could also be like tar balls that would land and spread fire. So you go down this path, we come to the modern days, we use the same word, it's missile, but now missiles are guided missiles, in liquid fuel powered missiles, and solid fuel powered missiles. And we have all kinds of missiles. We even have electromagnetic missiles that are launched off of rail guns. So you can see how words are developed. Now, when we come to the word horse, the word that we have for cavalry comes from the French word for horse. And now we use cavalry not merely for horses, but we use cavalry for air cavalry, for armored cav. So it's transported soldiers is what it is. It comes down to in modern times. Now, here's another interesting thing on this subject. In ancient Greek, they didn't have a special word for cavalry. It just said horses. So when you're reading Xenophon or some other historical writer who mentions the soldiers being arrayed on the battlefield, and he talks about 10,000 horses, he's talking about 10,000 horse-mounted soldiers. So hopefully, I think you get the picture. When we come to the book of Revelation, just because the Greek talks horses doesn't mean that can't be modern cavalry. And it doesn't mean that the missiles can't be modern missiles. They're just using the terms that they used back then, which same roots and words we use today in a much expanded way. And those much expanded ways or developed ways are just as literal in a dictionary sense as the earlier senses. Okay, who is your favorite old-timey hymn and preacher? Well, one of my favorite hymns is, in fact, I've got it right over here. Let me go get it. Be right back. Years ago, I was given this little plaque. Whoops. Now we're doing this old video thing backwards again here. It says Higher Ground. I don't know if you've ever sang Higher Ground by Johnson Oatman, but the hymn says, I'm pressing on the upward way, new heights I'm gaining every day, still praying as I onward bound, Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's tableland, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. One of the reasons why I love this old hymn is when I was saved back in 1978, and through those first few years that I was a believer up until like 1982, I was in circles that all we sang was the 70s and early 80s era choruses and worship songs. And the first time I was in a Bible-believing church that actually sang hymns, I was in I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Agape Force way, way back. back in the 70s and the 80s. But I was in an Agape Force meeting in Tacoma, Washington, with some of my dear friends. I'm still friends with them today. And that was the first time I was in a meeting where they sang a hymn. And that hymn was Higher Ground. And it's been my theme hymn ever since. As far as my favorite old-timey preacher, I don't know if I actually have a favorite old-time preacher. Although if I had to pick just one old author that warms my heart, I would, oh man, his name just slipped my mind. He was a contemporary of Spurgeon, and he was in the Anglican Church. Maybe someone will jog my mind. I'll try to see if it comes to me in a minute. But he wrote a book called Holiness, which is the best book on holiness. Oh, J.C. Ryle. My wife just hollered it through the door. J.C. Ryle is my favorite. I never heard him preach, but I love his books. His expository thoughts on the Gospels are the best commentary on the Gospels I've ever read as far as practical reading. His book on holiness is the best book I ever read on holiness. Do you think the 10 kings will be based out of Europe or in their own regions of the world? Well, I think the 10 kings are going to be from the Roman Empire. So I think they're going to be from Europe, possibly parts of Africa and the Middle East. I think those regions will be divided up into 10 region states. But I think those 10 nations are going to dominate the entire world. I think that's what's going to happen. Because I don't think it's the UN ruling the world. I think the Roman Empire is going to exploit the UN to dominate the world. How about the 1 Corinthians verse about the covering head because of the angels? Well, I don't really want to go into that deep tonight. I personally don't spend a whole lot of time teaching on those kind of subjects. I think I know men out there that are 10 times deeper on those subjects than I am and have put 10 times more research into them than I have. I do believe that the study of the subject is of profit and benefit to the church. And I do believe, it states there that the angels are actually looking down from heaven. And obviously, whatever this head covering is, it's supposed to be teaching an object lesson, and that the angels are looking down here and observing, and that's part of what they see. Well, some of these projects in the Middle East, like the NEOM project, the NEOM project, time is going to tell. Probably only 1/3 of the grand, ambitious things that they've ever started to build in the Middle East actually come to pass, maybe less than that. There's been grand hotels planned and started that just flopped. There's been a lot of projects that have been planned and started and flopped. So we'll wait and see what happens with this one. Do we watch each judgment of the unsaved? Folks, that I don't know. I do know that we're going to be eyewitnesses at the great white throne judgment. How often or how much we're going to be there, that's another question. What do you think of Tim Cohen's book, Antichrist in a Cup of Tea? All the connections of Charles in his cipher, crest, red dragon, bear. Well, I personally have never heard of the book. There's a lot of books that go down the paths of investigating some of the prominent figures in the New World Order, and that go into a lot of detail in investigating the secret societies. And I have read some of that literature over the years. I have some of it on my shelves. But the difficulty that I find is that I don't find a lot of fulfillment or satisfaction if I spend too much time reading in the literature about these secret societies and learning all their ins and outs. To be honest, there's some men out there put a lot of time in it, and I'm thankful that they're able to give us, like Billy Crone, can put weeks of research into a couple 1-hour messages or half a dozen 1-hour messages, and we can all profit greatly from that. I've just never put a lot of time into it. It's never been my cup of tea. I will say this, that the little bit I have read about the secret societies and about these people, it's blood curdling, and I'll just leave it at that. Someone wants to know if the NEOM city being built is going to become Babylon. People might have a Babylon type ambitions with it, but I'm skeptical. Some of these grandiose building programs, the amount of money that's going to have to be laid out is insane. And with the war that's coming to the Middle East in the near future, I don't foresee any of these grandiose building plans being finished. Could the Revelation 12 sign in 2017 be the 7-year warning till the start of the tribulation? Possibly, but I've never been real excited about the Revelation 12 sign. What is China up to? Biometrics, 500 million surveillance cameras. Well, China is really on the cutting edge of Big Brother government. And China would really like to be the head of the New World Order. There's a lot of big, powerful nations and institutions that are jockeying to end up being the head of the New World Order and to run the New World Order. China is not going to be the New World Order. Russia is not going to be the New World Order. The New World Order ultimately is going to be Europe, is going to be the Roman Empire based. I believe it's going to be dominated by Europe, but I don't believe it's going to be inclusive only of Europe. I do believe America will be a part of that because I believe that we are essentially colonies of the Roman Empire. Do you think America is enveloped with the spirit of Babylon right now? Folks, I don't think any nation on earth is more Babylonian than America. That's just my opinion. Europe is bad, but I think America is worse. This is a question about should Christians be outside when the rapture happens? I'm not going to worry about it, folks. We're going to have our resurrection body first and then go up, so you don't have to worry about getting a knot on your head when you go through the roof. Well, that's the end of the questions, folks. That's a wrap. Great questions as always. Thank you, moderators, for all your amazing help. I wish that I was able to connect with you more in the chat during the time, but somehow I'm just not able to do both the live stream and mingle in the chat. So at any rate, thank you, everybody. Well, I'm going to shut the stream down, and then I'm going to head over to YouTube and chat for a few minutes.